Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello everyone, welcome to SciTech Culture, the podcast where we discuss all things science, technology and culture. My name's Ben Warner and I'm joined by my good friend, colleague and STC compatriot Steve Kern for another year of science, technology and culture. How are we today, Steve?
I'm good, thanks Ben. Happy New Year, everyone.
Absolutely, and it's our officially, we're going into our 7th year of podcasting now, about 2.5 years with science, technology, well, SciTech Culture, I should say. Yeah, and just on that, there's obviously, we're always looking at workflow and we've got it pretty much down pat now, but just something I wanted to touch on briefly was this idea of writing on an iPad. Now, I believe we've discussed productivity on the iPad in the past, but I think because, and I think it was a lot of these things with the advances in mobile devices, it happens gradually, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh yeah, I could do that using that device. So, back when I remember doing a blog post a couple of years ago on the old iPad I had, and it wasn't really, like I said, yeah, I could do it, but it's not really, I'm not seriously going to do it for, extended periods. But now that things like, Office is on the iPad, and, as much as we might have not like Word or whatever, the fact is, I know Word really well, having just used it for so many years, and the fact that it's on the iPad and it's really functional, makes it, basically gives me, a white screen with a cursor and I can just type away with a good Bluetooth keyboard, and it becomes a very interesting mobile writing option, and potentially one that could be better than using a laptop going forward. I think just in terms of the functionality, there are still some issues around overall workflow, and I think we were just touching on that before we got on about the fact that, I might write a blog post for, for SciTech Culture and have no problem, writing it up in Word, but then actually getting it onto, the site, fixing up typos or rearranging things or reformatting or whatever, I'm still going to be going back to my Mac to do that. So that's where the functionality falls down still. And I'm wondering how much longer it's going to take before they finally work that one out.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's that aspect. And then I think there's the aspect of retrieval. It's all very nice to produce files. If you're just keeping notes, how do you get them back? There's something about having a paper journal where just flipping through the pages seems to be better than typing into Spotlight. But you're right. I think this is a really interesting development, the ability to actually handwrite notes. And that will only improve. You'd hope that, at some point, though, you wouldn't need that second device to make sure that everything's in order.
Yeah, and just to, obviously state the obvious, it's not as if we're reinventing the wheel here. Obviously, people have been typing on iPads for years now, but in terms of our experience, I know for me, this is the first time I'm seriously looking at it, because it's a very distraction-free way of writing, because it's the iPad's one app at a time interface actually comes into its own advantage here, because it's just a white screen with a cursor and you're not distracted by anything else.
That's right.
Except for the, whatever Facebook messages or whatever that you get pop up. Make sure you switch all that stuff off when you start writing. But I think it's got some potential, and I think if Apple, and I think we've spoken about this in the past, that Apple really needs to do an iPad-only version of iOS that really takes proper advantage of the size of the screen and the processor and all of that to really make it a productivity device.
Definitely agree on that one. And but I think we're seeing a lot of these things come about, and who knows, even with some of the developments now around machine learning and AI, what other things will come out of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to just touch on two topics here. This one's related to Apple, two sad ones, unfortunately. A US family is suing Apple after a man using the FaceTime app on his phone while driving collided with their car, killing their 5-year-old daughter. So the implication on this one is that Apple should have built in some sort of instant software fix that could detect when you're driving, so that this guy would have been incapable of using FaceTime while driving. You know, in essence, the app would have switched itself off when it detected that you were driving a car. I don't know how that would work practically, or whether that could be actually done. Has anyone even asked why did this guy, you know, why aren't they pulling this guy up for actually using, like, having the lack of brains to use FaceTime while this occurred? It's just like if you're talking on the phone, texting, anything, you don't do those things while you're driving.
Well, the interesting thing on this one is I know through road safety authorities that they've actually looked at this for just normal mobile usage. And obviously the telcos aren't super keen on shutting down people's phones, and also it's impossible to tell who's driving and who's a passenger. So I really don't know. I mean, I think, you know, we'll get on to another topic in a minute. These technologies are here. People are using them. They're using them in ways that aren't intended or recommended. Yeah. And, I mean, really, at some point there has to be some responsibility from the user.
Exactly. Another unfortunate one, well, this is really unfortunate, and it's almost sad that it's happening in this day and age, but I think the tie-in here is with Facebook, and it puts a different spin on it. It's not as if, I don't know if it's necessarily a new thing, but it's what the crime in itself, but it was that story out of Chicago where 4 African-American adults, young people, basically attacked a mentally disabled person, you know, yelling obscenities about, you know, Trump and white people, etc. But what made it even worse, I guess, was that one of them was streaming it live to Facebook.
Look, I think that's really what this whole story is about, is the fact that these sorts of things have been done and videoed before. You know, we see people abusing other people on public transport on videos, but rarely are these sorts of things streamed live. Facebook has developed a technology that allows us to stream live. Great events, great moments for ourselves personally. And Facebook has given us the platform to say, hey, you know, show all your friends, you know, the wonderful, amazing, great things that you're doing right now, and somebody chooses to use that platform for this. There's no law against using a Facebook platform for this, but I suspect that somewhere down the track a law might be created.
Or it could be just that Facebook takes the initiative, and it's a bit like if, I think don't they have something in there, you're like, if you're abusing someone or whatever, and that person reports you, you can be thrown off the site or something like that. I mean,
it's hardly a punishment for what,
no, but at least maybe they need a better detection mechanism for when these things go on.
How? What if you were making a film or streaming, you know, a live episode, some drama or something like that? You know, Facebook, amazingly, seeing as historically they've been impossible to take down hate, you know, posts and, you know, hate videos and whatever else. But amazingly, they managed to take this down very quickly, this video, thankfully.
Or maybe maybe that's all they can do then.
Well, it still takes someone to report it. You can't stop someone abusing this because it's there. Facebook is providing it for you to freely be able to use it, which unfortunately means that people who are going to misuse it are free to do so. So I think the only thing would be, you know, maybe electric chair for people that choose to use Facebook in that manner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, changing tack completely now, and I happened to see a TED Talk which talked about space junk and framed it in a way that I think should be, you know, disturbing to a lot of people, particularly any of us that, well, not that many of us will in the short term travel into space, but you know, there's a companion article on the ABC about space junk and how big is the problem and what are we going to do about it. But, you know, there's so much rubbish up there, and in that TED Talk, it's like it's the Earth is surrounded in its own little envelope of, you know, it's like another atmospheric layer of junk. And I was almost trying to imagine how a spacecraft would be able to leave the Earth now? Is there enough space that they could navigate through all of that crap? And there doesn't seem to be any laws in place to deal with it. It's a significant problem, and even just from the fact that these things might, their orbits might decay and come crashing back down to Earth, and hopefully they'll burn up on re-entry, but what if they don't? That sort of thing. Who's going to take responsibility for it? There's all big questions in relation to this, and it's like a Wild West frontier where there hasn't been a lot of thought about how it should be handled.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, and personally, my approach on this is, I don't know, maybe a slightly different perspective, but all the space junk around the planet is tracked. They know where most of it is, the size of it, and most of it's pretty small, so it doesn't really represent a threat to anyone back on Earth. But it does represent a significant threat to, spacecraft, and we're only going to have more and more spacecraft, and it's going to be pretty terrible when someone's space holiday to the moon gets ruined because something collides with the ship and destroys everything gravity style. But the thing that's I find interesting is because it is mapped, because people know how much there is, and because basically you can see it, people think it's a problem. Back here on Earth, there's all sorts of rubbish, environmental, on the ground, in the air, underground, in the seas, you name it, and we just carry on.
Yeah. Maybe then it's a wider question of we should be a lot smarter about how we handle junk in general.
Oh, look, I think there's no question of that. I think not that I'd necessarily blame the space debris on the disposable philosophy, but I think some of that comes to it. At first it didn't matter. You had a booster stage up there, or a few things that you jettisoned or whatever. But there's a lot of stuff up there, and it's an environment we want to start exploring, and this, makes it even more dangerous than it already is. That's not a good thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, let's move on. And CES is now underway, and for another year. And I mean, we'll touch on a couple of things that I think popped out. I don't know if there was necessarily, that sort of Big Bang thing. I've found a couple. I think we've covered CES a couple of times in the past, and a lot of the time they may announce things, but then they don't amount to anything later down the track. One thing though that did catch my eye was Intel unveiling a credit card-sized computer called the Intel Compute Card. Basically, it's like the size of a few stacked credit cards, and can basically take a variety of Intel processors depending on what you need. This has become a thing, hasn't it? The idea of this mini PC. I just had a colleague at work. She managed to build a magic mirror over the Christmas break out of some Raspberry Pis, hooked up in the back, and we jokingly said, "Oh yeah, you just have to text it to ask the mirror who's the fairest of them all," that sort of thing. But it opens up possibilities for different types of applications when you have a tiny PC, which you could just plug in somewhere. And it just maybe it only has one function, and it's fascinating, isn't it, that it's gotten to that point?
Look, this is amazing. I think the Intel development in itself opens a whole new range of products. That's a credit card that can be a communications device between you, your financial institution. It can also be, a health identity card. It could be anything, anything at all. Any data you want to send to that could go there. It could be a central point to pull up and down from the cloud. This is probably the first part of connecting us to the Internet of Things, is having smaller devices that don't need to be everywhere. I must say CES this year has actually got me a little bit excited, because it's the first time, we haven't had to look at 8K TVs again that nobody's using.
Yeah.
But I've seen probably three things, and they're all based around exactly this sort of thing. So it's that Intel, the credit card sort of computing. It's the fact that car manufacturers now are all getting on board, not just with self-driving cars, but now they're bringing in whole ecosystems into the car. And when I say ecosystems, driver well-being, monitoring your e-health, stress levels, attention, everything through sensors in the wheels, through cameras looking at your eyes, all that, is now coming into the cabin. So that's just, to me, that's amazing. There's also a whole lot of robotics going on now, and all of this centers around Internet of Things and AI, which is finally coming. And I think when we look back in history, thank God we didn't get 16K TVs this year. This year's CES is probably the start now, I think, for the next 10 years of seeing all the AI developments. And I think they're going to be amazing.
Well, you can even go into things like VR and AR as well. Like, say, like you mentioned the car, the idea of a heads-up display that's a bit more three-dimensional, or just happens to pop up exactly where you need it, so that it's not distracting. Then you get other developments like VR worlds where you can sample things without having to go somewhere. That we've talked about in the past. The AR stuff's interesting, augmenting things that, maybe you can sort of see how, it's just bizarre because the AR thing, as an example, you could see so many applications for it, but the first one that seemed to take off was Pokemon Go, of all things. So, sometimes these things go in a more trivial way. Although Pokemon Go seems to, I don't know, I haven't seen people hanging around under bridges as much as I did a couple of months ago, so I don't know if it's died off or not. But it is becoming, I think, more... Maybe that's another important point to point out, is that it's becoming more conscious to the public, this type of technology.
Yeah, that's it. It's filtering in. And one thing on your small credit card sized computers is an interesting one. I forget what it's called, but I think it's for cruise ships. But it's like a medallion you wear, so it's in obviously a controlled environment. You walk around, it has your drink preferences in there, all the things you like to do, whatever. And as you go around, it learns what you do while you're away on the cruise ship.
Oh, yeah.
And, so it just speeds up every process and logs everything. And so that's the sort of thing where, when you're talking about those small computers, that's the Internet of Things. It's learning your behavior, and then it can talk to any other devices in the room.
Yeah.
And, anything from ordering you a drink before you get there, nice cold beer after being up on deck in the sun, or maybe like a bowl of fries to watch the sunset with.
And just one final point is just to highlight the fact that this is actually quite amazing. I think generally speaking, I just think we're living in a world now where we're now taking it all for granted that this stuff all works so well. I think we've had the benefit of seeing, right back when it didn't work so well, and when it was really computing was such a brand new thing, and the fact that I can, load up something as simple as a boarding pass on my phone and have it scanned at the airport and get live updates to the boarding pass as it's going along. That to me is amazing, even though it seems like it's routine now, as something that can be done. And that's, I think, something that should be sort of remembered in all of this too, that I think computing's got to the point now where it's just, it just works for the most part. EMP signals aside, frying everything or whatever. But when it's working, it just you're not getting the glitches, you're not getting all that sort of thing, and that's sort of branching all these companies out to trying all these different applications for computing that might not have seemed obvious as what they are now, like your cruise ship example, to go with that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's spoken obviously like a man who lives in an Apple ecosystem, because Android's not quite there yet. Another dig there, but just on that though, I'm going to call it now though, because Steve Jobs isn't here to do it. We're now in the post-phone era.
Yeah. It's the tiny computer era.
Yeah, I don't know what they're called. Yeah, whatever they are. I'm not going to even post phone. Because you're right, the Internet of Things now is taking over.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. As a good way to start the year. Our as we said before, our 7th year podcasting. It feels like old hat. It's so easy to do these things now, and it's good to stay in touch and sort of talk about these topics. It's just going to be, as I think we imagined before, unlimited potential of stories as we go forward.
Absolutely, on that.
Absolutely. All right, so don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. We've got blogs, photography, all these videos, etc. You can interact with us on Twitter, Facebook, Google+. Love to hear from you. We've got our Instagram accounts. Make sure you subscribe. We've got quite a lot going on there, YouTube, etc. And if you think anyone's interested on these discussions that Steve and I have on a regular basis, feel free to send them to scitechculture.com. We'd greatly appreciate that, especially if you can get them to subscribe as well. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.